Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, here in the audience and in the live streaming to our session today on financing the decarbonization of the maritime shipping industry. My name is Stephanie Sohm. I am advisor Transport and Climate at Kühn Foundation, and I'm very delighted to have this panel with me. But let me give you first a few words on Kühn Foundation, because you may not have met us yet in the maritime space, and that is for a reason. We have traditionally been very active in humanitarian logistics and also logistics education. But with the increasing importance of coming to a low carbon, climate resilient economy, we have set up this year a new climate center, and I'm pleased to have joined the center recently. I come from land transport rather, so I'm very glad I have all these gentlemen here on the stage who know exactly the business. And let me introduce to you, we have with us Xing Sang from the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, who is also our host today. Thank you for organizing this. We have with us Kim Pfeifers from AP Möller Capital. We have Roel Hondos from the International Maritime Organization and Ali Shehab from Maritime. And next to me, I have sitting Francisco Amenandaño from the International Finance Corporation. So I think it's a perfect setup to dive into the topic. And as we speak about maritime transport, we need to be aware that 80% of global trade is today facilitated by maritime shipping, but the sector also emits 3% of GHG emissions, which makes it crucial that we set it on a low carbon track as of now and achieve the sector's objectives by 2050. So what is the financing we need therefore? This is what we're going to discuss. So let me start first by asking each of you, you are on this stage for a certain reason, and it must be that in a way you must be important to the topic, but in a way the topic must also be important to you. So I'd like to start with Francisco. What is it exactly? Why does the topic matter to you, and how do you matter to the topic?
Well, we care about ambition when it comes to climate action, and climate action could not be complete without a due consideration of the value chain of transportation. And if we look at all the options that we have to decrease emissions across the value chain of transportation, shipping by ton or by metric of transporting merchandise is the lowest emitting option so far, but it still has a lot of emissions. So how do we work with that in a context of um, increasing private sector activities in emerging markets? Is why IFC has a lot of appetite for increasing its exposure to shipping, but in a way that address not only climate challenges, but also sustainability considerations. And we have a number of successful cases that today I would like to share.
Thank you. So here is money that wants to go to the private sector. Ali, why does the topic matter to you, and why are you important for the topic?
Thank you very much. EMV is a Maritime Classification Society. We are an independent expert in assurance and risk management. Our purpose is to preserve life, property, and the environment, and we work with our stakeholders to achieve that. Now, the subject of climate change is it's a responsibility of everybody, and that's where we, DMV, it is very important for us to work with our stakeholders and partners to ensure that those targets that have been set by the industry or outside the industry are achieved. And this can only be through collaboration and working with everybody. And that's why we are here today.
Thank you. Rule.
Thank you, and very nice to be here together with all of you on the podium. So the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, is the regulator of the global shipping industry. And so we are quite keen in the topic to regulate to make sure that the environmental footprint, carbon footprint of the global maritime fleet reduces over time in line with the temperature goals in the Paris Agreement. The IMO is part of the UN family, and we've particularly been mandated under the Paris Agreement by governments to work on the reduction and the phase out of greenhouse gas emissions of international shipping.
We're certainly going to discuss more on this in a few questions later. Now, Kim.
Thank you, and thanks for having me as well. I mean, so I'm representing AP Moller Capital, which is a company that focus on investments in transport and logistics infrastructure, and we aim to tackle global warming, food poverty, and disruptions in the supply chains, and therefore participating in the solutions here is something that's very important for us. So being part of the Maersk group, we are part of one of the biggest shipping conglomerates in the world. We have more than 1,000 vessels, so that sounds positive. But on the negative side, we are emitting 32 million tons of CO2 per year, and we as a group have now made a pledge to be neutral in 2040. And that means that since vessels, they easily last for 20 years, then as you can imagine, then when we take decisions on new buildings, then that has to take that into consideration, right? So the problem is here right now. It's not something we can wait for. And the last 26 vessels we have ordered were on e-methanol. So I'm here to discuss how all of this can come together before it's too late.
Thank you very much, Kim. And Xing.
Yes, thanks, Stefan. Yes, I mean, for us, you just mentioned how important, the global goods is relying on the global shipping. And it is also contributing about 3% of global emissions. For AIIB, we are, of course, focusing on, the Asia. If we think about the growth and the future global economies and shipping is going to be a very kind of a pivotal for this region's continued economic growth. So this 3% GHG emissions seems to be or sounds to be small, but it is really growing as the region is developing and also is growing. So for AIB as multilateral development bank, we let's say committed. Our mission is to finance infrastructure for tomorrow. So we feel that is one area that we could really help our clients and then to bend the curve, as my colleagues said before it's too late. So it is one very important area for the bank to add value to actually help the members to address GHG emissions. Thanks.
Thank you. And I leave it with you so the conversation maybe comes traveling back to me in a moment. I would like to hear from each of you say a few words on what are the most pressing points currently we need to address to get maritime decarbonization going. Now, you have the not privilege of being the first one and having a rapid answer. I'm gaining you a few seconds of time. But Xing, please.
Sure. So very quick words, right? One is the ambition of decarbonizing this sector. That is very glad we have IMO colleagues and who, I mean, I'm really looking forward to a sharing later on. And the second is the private sector. How we could work better and crowd in the private sector capital. So specifically, what the role of MDBs and including AIB, right? How we could facilitate these changes to happen.
Thank you
Thanks.
so much. Yes. What are your most pressing points?
There are many, but I think the shipping is not a country, so we don't have a president or government or somebody who can set the rules, right? This goes across countries. But if shipping was a country, we would be the fifth largest emitter in the world, right? Just beating Japan, but behind China and USA and Russia and India. So therefore, our good friends from IMO, so he's the president, right? But not with the full authority as a dictator. So how are we putting some regulatory frameworks around this?
Thank you so much. And I saw a rule already. Isn't there really all of this is not me? So
He corrected that nicely. Um, so yeah, I think from us as a regulator, legal certainty, investment certainty is what we want to create in order to make the transition happen. Last July, just a couple of months ago, governments within the IMO agreed on a net zero target for global shipping to be achieved around 2050. But if we look at the fuel consumption today, it's still over 99% fossil fuel. So we need to have a very steep curve to reach that net zero target. The 2050 target set by governments last July is a very keen point at the horizon. It shows the commitment, it shows what are we working towards, but we need a set of binding regulations in order to help first movers, and there are quite a number of first movers already showing what can be done. We need to make sure that through regulations, the rest will follow, but also create through the regulations the investment certainty for the private sector, for multilateral development banks, to make sure that there is investment going into infrastructure, port infrastructure, renewable energy infrastructure, and the fleet itself.
I would like to ask you in a minute more about this. I don't know, should I say the big bang of this year's IMO strategy? But I'm looking forward to hear more of those details. What is it for you, the pressing points, Ali?
The energy trilemma has to be affordable, sustainable, and secure. And that's what will take you to the journey of 2050.
Very precise. Thank you.
Well, from the IFC point of view, I'm noting that the value chain of shipping is not simple. So I think number one, we need to level the playground for everyone, and that's where regulatory aspects really come into play, to the extent possible. Second, we need to have a business case for each of the components of the value chain. For example, something can be done to really retrofit a vessel and to make it as low carbon as possible. But if that vessel is not going to have an optimal trajectory, for navigation, and it's going to be, dumping wastewater and process, in deep ocean, then I don't think we are targeting the right issue, especially if the owner of the vessel is not really controlling how the vessel is operated. As you may know, and I think our colleagues from AP Moller may provide more color, a lot of companies, they may own vessels, but they lease the vessels, and then at the end, much of the operations, optimization, and how efficiently it's being operated is not really up to them. So that's something that I think we need to be aware of. So not to oversimplify the issue. Also, there are several segments, even within deep water shipping. There are very specific segments, each of them with their own challenges. So we need to be aware of those differences in order to provide reasonable solutions for them. And all this has to be done in the context of build business case. And that business case is about having not only the stick, the regulation, but also the carrot, such as the demand from clients that are going to lease vessels. And at the same time, some clients that may be worried about their transportation emissions, their scope 3 emissions. On top of that, we have these moves into carbon import carbon tax, the carbon border adjustment mechanism from the EU. So all these factors come into play, and they may not affect in the same way to all the members of the value chain of shipping. We need to be aware of what works for them. Saying uh, is just about not using fossil fuels may run the risk on not identifying some early opportunities. For example, much of the discussions about shipping is about deep sea, long distance. But there is also an opportunity to use shipping for enabling the so-called modal shift. So instead of transporting goods by trucks, we can transport them, through ships, in near shore type of trajectories. So all that needs to be realized. It's granular, it's complex, but that's why, we need, market expertise when it comes to shaping those solutions.
Thank you, Francisco. These were a couple of few more, 2 or 3 key points I asked for. But I'm grateful you touched on a topic that I myself have not really understood, and maybe the panel can help unpack this complexity of who needs to light the carrot in this value chain. Like, how many parties of interest are involved in making a ship something, yeah. So who is the investors, etc. I tried to unpack this, and I came to the fact that there is the dentist pension fund who actually owns the ship. So do I now need to have a carrot that the dentist pension funds likes, or who are the actors that are involved in making this feasible? Who wants to take the question, because we have not prepared this one, but I think my panel is capable to improvise. Yes, please.
Oh, but it's definitely a complex situation, so we need to try to simplify it. And I think in rough terms, you can say that they are government and regulatory bodies. Then there are operators, engineers, those with the technological capabilities, constructions, and so on. And then there are the capital side of it. And to make this transition happen, then this is basically a new industry that has to be developed. And like in any industry transformation, then in the beginning, and those that takes the initial risk and so on, they tend to lose in the first round, right? So this is a game of that everybody has to give and everybody have to come together, because otherwise, we'll all sit and wait for each other. So the trick is to find the right technological solutions here, because actually production of e-ammonia or e-methanol or hydrogen at the scale here is not proven. It's very, very expensive compared to heavy fuel oil. And then I think for investors' point of view, capital will flow to those places where the risk and return balance are most optimal. This is just how it works, whether we like it or not. But so regulations have to come in. There has to be taxes. There has to be subsidies. There has to be grants. There has to be guarantees, and all these tools. So all of this has to come together.
Thank you. I think this brings us back to this: who can coordinate something? And Roel alluded to that you are setting the space for this coordination. Could you maybe give us an introduction first to this year's released new GHG reduction strategy for the sector, so we understand what it takes in terms of also of the scale, and then maybe also explain to us what is kind of the framework that IMO has set or will deploy in the next years to make this possible.
Sure, happy to. So I think the prime outcome of the negotiations that took place between governments. So again, IMO is a government-driven organization, and so the governments in the end need to come to an agreement. The net zero target for around 2050 is, I think, the key point where we're working towards. In addition, in that strategy, there are a number of milestones that have been agreed also by governments in order to kind of show the pathway between where we are now towards reaching that net zero target. And that consists of absolute greenhouse gas reduction targets, both for the years 2030 and 2040, between 20 and 30% for 2030, and between 70 and 80% for 2040. In addition, there's a target set for the year 2030, which is an energy target. And that consists of a 5% zero fuel or zero technology uptake by the global fleet by 2030. So that is not an absolute target, but a fuel or kind of energy-based target. 5% by 2030 doesn't seem high, but it actually is a significant number that requires both energy efficiency technology and alternative fuels to be really rapidly taken up between now, we're almost 2024 and 2030. So by having set that target for 2030, we really want to drive the investment happening in this decade. We know that this decade is really kind of the change, or the decade where change needs to happen to set us on that pathway. So that is there. In addition, we are working on binding measures, and the binding measures need to kind of translate the objectives into requirements for each and every individual ship that operates worldwide. So, and this is where really the strength of the IMO is, not just setting strategic objectives, but actually putting in place a set of regulatory requirements that apply to every ship. And we're working on that today. Again, governments agreed that these binding measures should be adopted by the autumn of 2025. So we have basically 2 years to do that. Negotiations are ongoing. They're tough. I think there's a very clear and strong commitment of governments to do this. And what we're working on right now is a combination of a fuel carbon content reduction target that has to kick in and be reduced over time. So setting a limit of the maximum carbon content of the fuel, in combination with a emission pricing mechanism. So that those technical, the fuel standard and the pricing mechanism need to kind of show the way through a binding set of measures towards the achievement of those targets.
And to make this possible, a lot of things have to happen together. As we already heard, we need to have those fuels. I would like to hear now from Ali, what are the technical solutions that we have now and that we hope to have soon when we need to meet those targets that Rule just explained?
Well, what we have now, I mean, if you imagine VLCC, which carries 2 million barrels from, let's say, from the Gulf all the way to Europe or into the Far East, that vessel sails at a speed of 15 knots. It burns about 100 tons of fuel oil. It emits 3.5 times in CO2 molecular. That engine, which brings the 15 knots, and the solutions which are already on board that ship, that engine is 40,000 horsepower. Now, in order for you to convert that completely into an electrification method of prime moving, and then having a total different source of charging that kind of electrification, then this would require what we call is more of a research and development, and that would require funding. Now, what technologies are available there are actually to upgrade those engines that are burning that fuel into an alternative fuel, whether it is ammonia, whether it is methanol, whether it is what's existing now is LNG, LBG, and that actually what is in the pipeline. So the engine manufacturers are having those in the, some of them are in the test stages, and some of them will be ready towards the end of the year. However, there are other solutions which to do more with other solutions to do with the ship, whether to do with the hull modification, whether it's to do with the painting of the vessel, whether it's to do with all the kind of electrical consumptions that's happening on board, improving that and get to have more of a seagoing working electrical load much less, and so on and so on. So these are happening. However, there is more funding needed for the R&Ds in order for things to happen, as well as, but this is outside the question, is that you need to prepare the future generation who are going to be operating these new technologies on board the ships. Did I answer?
I would have loved to ask the question, what kind of fuel is it going to be for the future? Do we need to pick one, or will it pick itself, or will we just have 3 different ones and every port will provide 3 different ones, and ships need to adjust their routing, etc., so they can bunker? Is there any thinking on this?
Well, it's going to be, as I mentioned earlier, it has to be affordable, it has to be sustainable, and it has to be secured. So therefore, if you are a ship owner and you're going to trade, for example, ship is there for a purpose. It's going to sail from point A to point B for certain cargo to be shifted from one place to another. Now, loading from one place need to have that affordable, secure, and kind of a fuel which is sustainable. Also, when you go and you discharge your cargo on the other side, needs to have the same mechanism. What we have now is green corridors, etc., which actually creating some kind of environment for that to be achieved. But now to come and specifically to say the fuel of the future is methanol or ammonia or LNG, you don't have that answer because now the school of thoughts within ship owners and organizations who are running those tonnage that they own that tonnage, actually they have different thoughts, different criteria, and different ambitions and different targets. As long you are operating on an ROI basis, not on a strategic basis, it's going to be very difficult really to achieve the targets.
Thank you. I think that was clear, the message. And Kim, you pointed earlier to the fact that there is a lot of things that need to come together, and private sector wants to have certainty if they invest in something. Banks are nodding as well. Could you maybe talk a bit more about this financing gap? If you have a figure in your head, you can share that with us. But what is the financing gaps that you see? But also what can be done in the short and medium term? Because I heard there are some solutions that do not sound so costly to me in the very short term. Others are more medium term. Can you give us your view on financing gaps and the potential solutions there?
Yeah. Um, so um, so in the global supply chain, then the big emittance is taking place at on the ocean. But it's actually not. It's not the technology on board the vessels that are the biggest challenge here, because I think the solutions are there. There could be something on ammonia, which is a highly toxic type of fuel, and so on. But I'm not the expert. But the cost sits more on the inland infrastructure that is needed to produce the green fuel, right? Because these factories, they will consist of a huge renewable power production facility with solar or wind. Then there will be an electrolyzer that takes water and electricity and produce hydrogen, and then there has to be a conversion of hydrogen into methanol and ammonia, and then this stuff has to be transported to a bunkering port somewhere where the vessels are sailing by, right? And there are many numbers thrown around, but I've heard something like $2 trillion for the total infrastructure to make all of this work. And that has to be in place before 2035 or something to get to the 2040, 50, and so on. So this is just an enormous amount of capital needed to make this work.
That's some very interesting element. I also learned, and during the stop, I was in another event, and there was, I think, the CEO of the Port of Antwerp, and he said that if you want to decarbonize shipping, 80% of the money needs to go in ports and the other infrastructure, and not in the actual ship. So this is an interesting element. Um, do we see private sector actors come knock your door and ask money to decarbonize shipping?
Actually, the frequent question is, can you finance the upstream components of decarbonization, such as the port infrastructure, such as the first plants that are going to produce hydrogen for methanol or for other applications. So it is those upstream components that are being requested as we speak. There has to be a critical mass within the market to answer this question, which is the most reasonable source of propulsion, for shipping. So, and that question can only be answered if we have real options on the table, and those real options are as expressed by the manager of the Antwerp port, not on the vessels necessarily, but on the upstream and related components, of the needed infrastructure that supports decarbonization. In a way, it's similar as well to what we see in aviation. In aviation, there is a challenge, of course, for decarbonizing the plane, but there is also a challenge to provide airports with the needed sustainable aviation fuel and all the underlying infrastructure to enable that decarbonization. So again and again, uh, looking at the equipment, in this case vessel, in isolation may not provide a complete answer. We need to look at the whole value chain, including the ports, including those that are going to deliver to the port the different energy options, what happens upstream, and what are the business models of those business diesel owners and operators. So all that comes together.
This is again a lot to coordinate. We talked about infrastructure a lot. We have Xing here, who is to finance infrastructure because you're from the Infrastructure Investment Bank. And so the chunk has to come from you. So what do you say, Xing?
Yes, okay. That is a very nice expectation for the bank. Thanks for that. It's just to say that, yes, we do have to have a holistic view, right? I mean, colleague talked about the entire supply chain, the enabling infrastructure. Also talking about actually the maturity of the different technological alternatives before we actually can, just having this, let's say, deep penetration of this type of solutions. And then because of this, let's say these key elements are still being kind of developed, I think we should also, when we were thinking about the type of the instrument, we should also think about this instrument that could allow a process like a progression instead of expecting a kind of overnight shift. So that is normally the conversation that we want to have, this kind of in-depth conversation, because shipping sector, it is a kind of cyclical, right? And many times the profit margin is a sin. So we have to bear that in mind. So with that said, I think one type of instrument, I think we are thinking more and more is this performance based financing instrument. So basically, we engage with the client and agree on a decarbonization pathway, allowing that it is going to be a process instead of a kind of a sharp shift, overnight shift. And in this way, the client could actually work proactively on.
Xing, 1 second. Who is this client? Make it more, that we can imagine. So who is this client we talk about?
Okay. So one of the clients we actually work together with IFC, that is Express, that is a shipping company or the client that we co-finance together. In this particular deal, we could actually work on a decarbonization pathway with a clear timeline and then a milestone achievement as the KPIs. So I think this offers the flexibility and also demonstrate the client's the commitment, right? At the same time to respect what the available the solutions on the market.
What was financed together with this client? What was the financing objective? What did you finance?
Right, exactly. So the project itself is to introduce the high efficient ships like the vessels. I think we're coming at the time of the fleet renewal window, and then by working together, we help the client to bring in the new efficient vessels, and then to also replace the existing ones.
Thank you. I would like to go back to this more complex thing where we also talk about the energy must be there and the infrastructure must be there, and I'm looking at Joel. And I would like to hear from you. Do you see this kind of chicken egg thing happening currently? That's what we had in land transport, when it was all about, yeah, but I can't buy an electric car because I don't have charging. And then the people with the charging said, why should I put in a charging station? But because there's no car to charge. So is this kind of a similar thing? And is there any idea how you, as the IMO coordinating maritime sector, can break through to the energy sector to make this happen?
So the our 2050 target is a clear target that allows for the different fuels to be tested and for ship owners that are kind of front runners to experiment with that, see how they can access these fuels, how they work in practice, and bring that experience back to the IMO so that we can regulate. The IMO doesn't regulate the upstream, so the energy sector, but we can regulate what the shipping industry wants to have on board of its ship. And that in itself is a very strong signal. And that's what we're working on. So to have a carbon content defining regulation in place that will send that signal to the upstream market. In addition, the pricing mechanisms will help those first movers to bridge the price gap between the fossil fuels today and those alternatives that they are trialing and that they're trying to get their hands on. But I think it's important that um, we look, and that's also for us as the IMO, and a task that we have to take upon us is to look at what's happening in the upstream part, in the finance part, and bring all those players together because it's obvious that the shipping industry itself, through IMO, cannot make that whole transition. So, and I think here at COP, there's so much discussion about green hydrogen, renewable hydrogen production in the global south. And as is the case today with oil tankers, gas tankers, the renewable hydrogen produced in Namibia needs to go by ship to Rotterdam or to other kind of high demand, energy demand centers around the world. So it's again the shipping industry that will make this overall transition of the global economy happen. And I think this is a task or this is a narrative that in the shipping industry, we need to be more active. We need to be more proud of that. Shipping is an enabler of the global energy transition, and we need to form partnerships with these renewable hydrogen production, with other sectors, cement, steel, aluminium, that all are on a pathway, but they all need shipping as a very important part of their logistic chain. So, and that is where we need to seek the synergies in finance. So, finance that will go into renewable steel production, you know, try to link a shipping component as an add-on to that because it's very important for steel also to be traveling from one part of the world to the other. So let's make the shipping part of that decarbonization and bank on the investments in these kind of industries.
Is there any cross-industry sector initiatives? Because the questions you raised are extremely important, right? Those sectors will have a different demand of what they need to have shipped from. It's not A anymore, it's B anymore, it's going to C, it's going to D. So how are you working on this? Like, is there somebody thinking and are you reaching out to those future client demands to understand?
So I think the maritime corridors and there have been quite a number of events here around COP about corridors involving ports, but also the cargo owners. So the steel producer, the the large kind of Unilevers, Apples of this world that transport. These are the stakeholders that need to come together tonight, together with the finance sector. And we actually see that the UAE co-presidency is very much focused on bringing together a number of hard to abate sectors, including shipping, including aviation, steel, cement, aluminium, in order to kind of form these partnerships and to allow us to talk together and see what works jointly in decarbonizing.
And use those synergies that you already mentioned earlier in kind of investing to produce the fuels that you may be sharing with the aviation industry. Ali, there in terms of ships, what we just heard also from Rule, I think we have today an enormous capacity to ship fossil fuels around the globe. I think it's like 40% or a third of the global fleet that is dedicated to transporting coal, oil, gas. If we think of the 2050 scenario, this will reduce drastically. There will be some, we know, but the amount will reduce considerably. So what do you see? Is this a risk for the existing shipping fleet? Will it be fully recovered? What does it mean to operate it if it ships something else? Do we need to refit vessels? Are there investments we can shift from those people in these ships to something else? What do you think about this?
Now, what we talking about here is the cargo shipping is 40%. We shipping hydrocarbons by sea. The subject that we are debating about here and talking about is actually reducing the emissions of those fleets that are carrying those hydrocarbons. So the future will will continue that you will have hydrocarbons transported by sea. However, as we were discussing earlier, there will be some solutions that there will be adopted, and the energy used on board ships that will have, net zero by 2050. And then, of course, maybe this 40% will grow even in the future. So November 2022, we had human being number 8 billion. In 2050, you have human beings will populate the earth 9.7, almost to 10 billion. So the trade, which is the connection in all of this, will grow. And therefore, this 40%, which is used for different purposes, and one of them is energy, and some of them are actually for petrochemicals and so on, will of course will continue to happen, and this industry is destined to for a growth in accordance to that population growth, and there will be a need for shipping, etc. Can I take you for an imagination journey? So if we, yeah, I mean, if you imagine that we are in 2050, and I want to be positive here, we are in 2050 and everything is great. So the population is 10 billion, oh, sorry. And we have achieved the limiting of the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees. And we have achieved the net zero for the maritime industry. And then we are looking of how, and we are talking at that, oh, what a fantastic work that we have done, and that we have achieved this target so remarkably. And then really, how did all these stakeholders come together? And also the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank with their checkbooks that they've been issuing for us, and for us to, invest what they say is 28 billion to 90 billion that you need to invest, and then like the number on the infrastructure ashore. And then, of course, when you look at all of that, and then you come back to this debate that is happening, and for things really to be pushed, and for them to happen. The actually the imagination finished here. The I don't lose you. Uh, Actually, when you look at the targets has been set by the IMO decarbonization strategy in July 2050, but in June and May of this year, or let's say last year, we were talking on a target of 2050. It was 2100. So 50 years were brought earlier for things to happen. And then for the projections, took much steeper direction. It's a great challenge, and the industry is up for it, right? But then with this challenge, with this, how can I say, so tight timeline that we have to work on, we need so many accelerators that to happen for this industry to achieve its targets. And we, within DMV, we collaborated in the UAE with the Ministry of Energy and Infrastructure, and where we've established the UAE Maritime Decarbonization Center. That's where we're going to bring all the stakeholders into creating all those solutions. And this will be one of the accelerators that can perhaps bring in the solutions in the future.
Thank you for this visionary excursion, Ali. And you're right, the time we have and where we need to align and coordinate these stakeholders, I think it's 26 years we're talking. I just made the calculations. I graduated from high school 26 years ago, and it still feels like, yesterday. So better speed up. We were talking about, in the beginning, private sector money crowding in. We have talked about new opportunities for producing energy based on renewables, especially in developing regions. You work with those regions, you work with the private sector. 2 days ago, I heard that despite the huge capacity to produce renewables in Africa, 2% of private investments in the sector go there. So what does it need to bring now technologies that are even not as mature as solar and wind to the continent? And how can we attract the private sector investment we need there to provide those fuels?
Well, when it comes to financing, there is a sensitive balance of return and risk, meaning that depending on the profile of the investor, you may have very specific tranches of return and risk that is expected. So when it comes to new technologies, not commercially proven and all that, that falls on the remit of, let's say, venture capital and those higher risk type of interventions. Um, so I think that what we can do as a financial system, multilateral banks, and all that is to see how we can help to de-risk at least those that have very promising commercial potential. We have done a little bit of that. For example, in the steel industry, financing through equity, the commercial deployment of a very novel technology that creates steel without any emissions. So something like that may happen as well for any of the critical energy options that we may have for decarbonizing shipping. So it is about having the right combination of the opportunity, the counterparties, the off-taker of the technology. In the case of the steel, for this investment, for example, we got the professor, from MIT developing this technology some years ago, and then a company trying to commercialize that, and then we had our own client, Votorantim Metals, that was open to apply that technology. So we had to finance the equity here and also the implementation over there. So that was, in a way, closing the loop. Imagine that happening for shipping, for decarbonizing shipping. That could be a case. But of course, a lot of work needs to happen for that.
He wants to buy also all those fuels to make it happen. So there's buyer. Now there's just the money
Yes.
needed. Huh? Chinga, I saw you taking a lot of notes. How do you read those to us?
It's a very good discussion, and this is a sector I would say, let's say, it isn't relatively new to the bank, to AIB. We are still kind of expanding our pipeline. It is also quite a specialized sector, so that's why I'm so happy to have, like, for example, the great panelists here and to share different ideas. Like just to say this private sector and the new technology. So I think private sector mobilization has been a very difficult topic for years, right? I think perhaps everyone here has been to COP for long enough, or many COPs, and I think this is a topic just comes back again and again. I mean, when it comes to this sector in particular, just in addition to what Francisco mentioned, talking about a commercial perspective and a business case, and 2 points perhaps I want to quickly mention is, one is this, just to accept that this sector needs more innovation and then acceptance of innovation in terms of the risk appetite. Right? Just to kind of accept the fact that, okay, that is a sector still have a long way to go, and then when we were financing project in that sector, from the financial institutions perspective, that we have to deal with. So that is one. And just mentally to be prepared and for the challenges. And second is the partnership. I also think there are indeed some, let's say, sometimes we really need the catalytic power or impact coming from, for example, the concessional funding is coming from grant or soft type of structure. And that's to demonstrate, um, you know, some project and to demonstrate to the private sector, actually it works. And then so that it create the buy-ins and comfort, to allow the private sector to take over, to reach that critical mass, and so that the market can really take over and to mainstream. So and I think for this part, perhaps the MDBs and also the partners who are providing this type of resources could be worked better together to tap into the sector to help with that.
Thank you, Xing. So to prepare you, because I think this is a good exercise. Maybe you want to take the opportunity and ask one of your fellow panelists a question you always wanted to ask. So this is going to be an opportunity I want to give you. And equally for the audience, if there's questions, please think what you want to ask. We will get there in about 2 minutes. But you gave me a keyword, which is pilots. So important to see on the ground how it works and how it works. Is there anything out there that we see as a pilot? Do you have insights into this? Is there anybody operating already pilots in that sense? Yes.
Yes, I think it's, I mean, in terms of production of green fuels, things are moving in the right direction, step by step. There's a lot of projects out there, and there's still early greenfield waiting for things to come together, waiting for getting an offtake, and then getting to FID, to financial decision time, right? So as an illustration, there's a project in Saudi Arabia that has come to financial decision time, and that's because the Saudi government, they have guaranteed the offtake. It's just how it is. Then there's another. So the Maersk Group, we have made a commitment to purchase 500,000 tons of methanol from Goldwinds in China. And this is also because China, they have somehow subsidized that production because it's strategic for China, as it should be for anybody else. So it's moving in the right direction, but it's back to what we have discussed here. It's everybody has to come together to get the right risk and return balance in these projects.
Again, the cooperation that we've mentioned so many times already.
Yeah.
So I give the first opportunity to the panel. Is there any of you who would like to ask a question to one of your panelists here? Or do you know everything anyway the others are thinking and doing? Yes, Kim, please.
So my question would be, what I mean, what are we gonna do if we don't reach the 1.5? I mean, what's the alternative?
Do you want an answer from one specific person or from just whoever has an idea?
Anybody that has an idea.
Well, it can be very catastrophic. Climate change phenomena will be worse, and that will be very evident, and you will see it very often. As well as when it comes into the marine life, you will see a lot of effect on that. You can Google that chart where it shows between this temperature shifting to that temperature, and that increase where it affects the marine life, and then it's, of course, that's going to be very catastrophic for the people who are dependent on that marine life, and the marine life as well is very important for the human being as overall. I think that's my thought.
Should we agree that we do not want to miss the target because it's so doom otherwise? Yeah, nodding heads. Do we have questions from the audience? Yes, please. Please ask a question and tell us who you would like to answer the question. Do I have to bring the mic to you? Sorry.
Actually, it's more of a comment. I'm from the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and this question that you posed is quite critical as to how we're making sure that we look at solutions in a holistic way. So you are looking at mitigation and adaptation and resilience together. And when we're talking about transition, we've seen also discussions where you also make sure that you're talking about resilience. So the answer to that question is, I think there's going to be a major challenge to get to the 1.5. Therefore, every investment needs to maximize adaptation and resilience. So topic areas where we're focusing on just decarbonization, I think are where we need to make sure that when we're talking about decarbonization, particularly with what we're doing with Paris alignment at AIIB, we're trying to make sure that every investment is Paris aligned, and therefore we are assessing physical climate risk. So I would answer it in that way, and that would be our focus as well in the maritime sector.
Thank you. That was a
What do you mean with that in the maritime sector?
so wait a minute, now we're having a discussion here. So you answer that question? Sure.
A good question. We're focusing. I mean, maybe you should explain to me what the maritime sector is. But what we do at the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank is we focus on particular sector areas: energy, water, transport, urban, and we would work with the clients as to how they define the sector areas. So the main way we want to try to work is not as we move forward is not necessarily just working on a project, because by virtue of doing Paris alignment, we're having to look at the low carbon pathway and also resilient pathways, but more so on the low carbon pathway part, we're looking at mitigation and what's happening in terms of strategically getting to the targets that we need at a country level and a sector level. And that's where we need more information in particular sectors. But certainly, it's the industry itself needs to engage with us to define what they define as the maritime sector. I hope that.
I think we can agree that mitigation and adaptation are two sides of one coin, and we somehow have to think it together. To the panel, is there still a thought that you want to, or a question you want to ask your co-panelists? I have one more question I would like to give room to, and if not, I'll ask you, and I'll tell you now, what is what you would put on this little note, sticky note that you slip to the COP president before his final talk? What is it what you want to get from him? Is there any more question? Now we have to think hard about this. You have a question.
I have a question. To our colleagues here, from the finance side of things, what is it that you need from us, from the IMO, to make sure that the capital that you have available goes into shipping, or let's say the broader maritime value chain, as opposed to investments in urban areas or in sanitation or whatsoever? I mean, we understand that capital has limitations. So what can IMO give you to make sure that the capital flows to shipping, ports, and renewable energy?
Well, if I can start, well, there is actually something concrete that you can do. One of the very promising instruments, not only for multilateral banks, but in general for all commercial finance, is sustainability linked finance. That has a very thorough process to avoid greenwashing, KPIs, ambitious targets defined, a verification process. But that step zero is to have data to benchmark the proposed targets that those clients, want to use. Because as you know, in sustainability linked finance, there is a target, and if they achieve the target, there is a pricing implication. For example, a step down on interest rates, all that. But uh, much of the sustainability linked finance is focused on, let's say, decrease your carbon emissions or production emissions and this and that. But when it comes to shipping, if a shipping company comes, it's difficult to benchmark and to say for that particular company operating this way, your peers are going to have this average performance when it comes to efficient, efficiency factor for the vessel, or the carbon intensity per ton or per cubic meter transported. So those type of statistics are really helpful to really inform the process of benchmarking and determining in a very clear way, based on evidence, if there is a case for supporting decarbonization through, let's say, step down in interest rates. And that is an excellent carrot. Irina, your counterparty for renewable energy, did something like that. They did and already do a systematic year after year stock taking on where we are on cost of generation, in dollars per megawatt hour for different technologies by country. And therefore, we can use that as a way to say, well, I am getting the biggest impact per dollar on this investment, and that really motivates. You can even define targets based on those statistics. So imagine having that, you know, a evidence-based resource to enable sustainability-linked finance for shipping. That will be very powerful. Um, so
I think Rule sees already the working group coming together at IMO to prepare this. Thank you so much. Gentlemen, we are at the end of the session, but I just asked you this one question and I said, you have a sticky note. What is the message you want to slip to the president so that he acts in your course? So the sticky note is very small, and which means that you should now be very short. What is on your sticky note, Shing? It's a
Um,
small one.
it's a small one. Right. So perhaps so I will say, now at the political level, like the political will is there. So we have this 2050 target. And then that's really translates into the sectors, because we have a lot of discussions at the high level, and then that's a find better communication or engagement campaign strategy who can really actually encourage and bring along those sectors to really for actions to come.
Thank you. Double-sided sticky note, but valuable. Thank you. Tim, can I come to you?
Yeah, I think the concept of COP and then now COP 28, it's a good forum to talk and keep the awareness and so forth. But the key message that is that the chairman should continue to show leadership and stop talking and promote acting.
Clear.
Shipping is not just a transport mode, but shipping is key to the global energy transition.
Ali?
The spirit of your appetite for decarbonization make it infectious.
Very elegant words. Thank you. Francisco.
uh, I will say create a market mechanism for international sources of emissions. That includes, for example, shipping. Similar to what we are discussing on market mechanisms now in general, but those are very sovereign oriented. So shipping, a lot of that falls under no jurisdiction. So how do we create a market mechanism that is ambitious in the framework of the convention that enables that? Because the moment we acknowledge that, then the moment we will have a deeper discussion and resources involved and people really taking this seriously.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your time and for making this so difficult topic a light one today in the discussion. And I would like to close with Ali's idea. Let's imagine us next year and think, what has this discussion here initiated and where are we now just in a year? So I advocate for continuing this important exchange. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. It was my pleasure.